for many white people, this seemed to be kind of an awakening, that they saw for themselves the depth at which white supremacy in all of its forms, and in particular with George Floyd, with the police officers, they saw it themselves. And I think that people still are reckoning with what happened to Breonna, the fact that she was killed while she was sleeping in her own home. And all of these have had impacts on all of us, hopefully, to challenge the way we see the world. And that continues as well with food. And those of us here in Northern California, I don't know why my slides are not working right now. There we go. We also had the fires to contend with. And those of us who live in the Bay Area, we know we had to deal with really bad air. We also had the fact that we couldn't go outside. A lot of us, at least here in Sonoma County, where we're based, we had to just keep ourselves packed because we never knew if we were going to have to evacuate. But this too impacted our food supply. Now, did this impact non-human animals? Absolutely. We know that the fires impacted countless animals who perished in the fires, and who, yeah, it's heartbreaking to think, right, of all the animals who lost their lives. But we also have with COVID-19 another situation where you have a lot of dogs and cats being adopted because a lot of people knew they were going to be stuck at home. And it seemed a great time to have, well, for me, at least watching videos, a great time to have a kitten around to make you smile. I don't know why my slides are not working. Sorry. Okay. We also had, we have animals in entertainment. Now, maybe this didn't change much during the pandemic, although many of us who were concerned, who's taking care of these animals when everybody's locked in? We still have animal experimentation taking place. All of these things and issues that those of us who fight for animals, who fight very appropriately for the lives of animals, it didn't change much. We still had farmed animals being killed. And things that we did in our regular lives as activists, as vegans, we recognized the impacts that it had, but also that it didn't change anything enough. Nothing broke down. Nothing really said this, the way that our food system is has never worked and it's never benefited. These types of situations still continued. But activism had to change, right? We had to figure out different ways. We are not in San Francisco right now celebrating this Veg Fest, right? We're doing it online. Same thing with our activism in other ways. So Food Empowerment Project organizes a Fight for the Ocean where we go and do ocean cleanups. Well, we couldn't do that this year, right? We didn't want to risk anybody getting sick, anybody passing on COVID and impacting anybody else. So we turned our event online. We had a virtual Fight for the Ocean where we came up with things that people could do inside their homes and help us fight for the ocean. So looking more specifically how COVID-19 impacted people, let's take a look at farm workers. So we're headquartered in Sonoma County, where the Latinx population accounts for less than 28% of the population. And yet we represent 76 of the COVID-19 cases. Now, I'm part of the Sonoma County Public Health Department's Latinx Task Force. And every week we're faced with the reality of what the Latinx community is going through because we have the highest rates of COVID in the community. We're not even the majority of the population. And yet because of systemic racism that exists in this country, we are the ones who are dealing with the brunt of all of this, right? We are the vast majority of people who are considered essential workers, rather that be in the grocery stores, and I'm talking specifically about Sonoma County. I know other areas, but predominantly, right, it's going to be Black and brown people and a lot of working moms out there who are the vast majority of people who are essential workers in the grocery stores, the fast foods, and the restaurants. And so here in Sonoma County, it wasn't different. We have farm workers who were coming down with COVID-19. And again, I'm going to go through and explain why the pandemic didn't necessarily change anything. It exacerbated everything that farm workers go through. It made everything a little bit worse. And again, as a vegan organization, Food Empowerment Project recognizes that we're asking people to not consume non-human animals, right? Therefore, we're saying we want you to eat more fruits and vegetables. It's better for you, it's better for them. But we can't ignore what happens to farm workers who pick our food. Because as compassionate people, we're saying we don't want people eating animals. And our compassion extends to human animals as well. So let's take a look at the fires. How did the fires impact farm workers? Well, what we had here in Sonoma County was we had farm workers who were forced to work in the evacuation zones. So evacuation zones that were determined that the fire was too close, nobody should be there. Wineries were seeking permits from the Agricultural Commission so that they could send their farm workers out there to work in these areas. Now, it wasn't limited to the wineries. You also had the livestock industry doing this, claiming again that it was for the animals, that they needed to send their workers in there. And again, you had farm workers down in Southern California working through those fires as well. So these are some of the ways in which the fires and the pandemic impacted our food, right? We're talking about food justice. We're talking about justice for everybody in the supply chain. And for some of us, we don't want that supply chain to include non-human animals. So we want people to stop eating animals for food, but we can't ignore the farm workers. So what is this? When we talk about the fact that farm workers and Latinx community members had some of the highest rates of COVID. In fact, farm workers, I won't say that they were the highest, but a lot of them, because not everybody indicated where they worked, but a lot were in the agricultural fields. So it's important to recognize the lifespan of the farm worker is about 49 years old. You have farm workers who are working, bending over picking. They suffer from injuries from the equipment they're using. They have a lot of physical injuries because of their back pain. They have chemicals, exposed to agricultural chemicals. And a lot of the women who work in these fields are sexually harassed. Now, when you're looking at this picture, there was a story on Frontline, just to give you an idea of a farm worker working in the Central Valley, again, predominantly where we get our produce, not only in California, but around the world. But Frontline focused in on a woman who was raising her child by herself. She was also living with her mom, and her sister lived with her. Her mom was elderly and her sister was a quadriplegic, and she herself had cancer. So every day she took her chemotherapy pills and she'd go out in the fields to work every day, not making barely enough money to survive, not having the ability, she would have a COVID-19 test because in these facilities, if you look at the picture right here, what makes this picture show us why COVID-19 would be so hard for farm workers to avoid human contact, right? One of the requirements or the suggestions is 6 feet apart, right, to social distancing. That's impossible. It's impossible for the farm workers in the fields. It's impossible for the farm workers who are out there packaging and putting the produce into the containers. Now, some are definitely trying, they're working with it, but this is why this woman was forced to have a COVID-19 test because some of her workers came down with it. And again, when I say that these issues are exacerbated by COVID-19 is because of things like this, and also because farm workers aren't being paid well, right? They suffer from wage theft. They may have a contractor who skips town and doesn't pay them for their wages. They are living, they're experiencing homelessness. Many live, and especially a lot of the farm workers that we've worked with, are living maybe 16 people to a 1-bedroom. And that's not to say because they want to all live together. It's the fact that they're not making enough money. In the Bay Area, including Santa Cruz, Watsonville, where a lot of the farm workers are living, it's very expensive. And for them to be able to afford a place to live on their own, they can't do it. So they have to all pitch in together. Same thing in which they travel to work, right? Because they're all getting into vehicles or they're taking public transportation because they don't make enough money in order to buy vehicles or to have their own cars. So these are some of the reasons why some of the farm workers are suffering from some of the highest rates of COVID-19. Now, what Food Empowerment Project encourages people to do, as always, is if you want to help farm workers, we encourage you to support the boycotts called by farm workers themselves. That would include a boycott against Driscoll's Berries because of and in fact, during the pandemic, we saw campaigns by Driscoll Berry workers in California demanding that they take better care of them and they actually adhere to the guidelines that the state was requesting. But there is a request by the San Quintin farm workers in Mexico for people to boycott Driscoll's. There's also a campaign by the Coalition of Immokalee Workers asking for us to boycott Wendy's because they're just asking for one more penny per pound for the tomatoes that they pick, and they're not being given it. Now, Food Empowerment Project, we also organize a school supply drive for the children of farm workers. And everybody who's on this, if you've donated, if you've spread the word about our school supply drive, thank you so very much for that. When the pandemic hit, the first thing we did was we asked farm workers, what is it that the farm workers need? What is it that you want? And farm workers were told, we need school supplies for our kids, right? Because at the beginning, like we still had March, April, May for the kids to go through school. They were no longer able, at this point in time, the kids were no longer able to go to school in person in the classrooms. So they needed school supplies. We had school supplies left from the prior year. We were able to get all those school supplies to the kids. Next, we asked, what do you need? They needed food. Farm workers who pick our food still are in desperate need of food. We sent over, thanks to probably many of you on this, we did a fundraiser asking for people to please donate so we could get farm workers food and get them masks. And we sent over $9,000 worth of food to farm workers in Sonoma County and in the Central Valley. Food is the most precious thing that the farm workers need right now. And yet that's what they do, spend their days doing. And yet it's not something they have access to. But this year we were able to donate over 645 backpacks filled with school supplies. We had to do it differently this year. Typically, we rely on a robust amount of volunteers to help us out, but we had to do it differently, but we were still able to get this many backpacks and school supplies to the children of farm workers. So a huge thank you to everybody who helped out with this effort. And again, the majority of the school supplies that we give are going to farm workers who are indigenous. So these are farm workers who do not speak Spanish even, right? So when the fires broke out, all the alerts that were going out to farm workers were in English and in Spanish. The farm workers in our area did not know until the organization we work with drove from Napa to tell those farm workers to evacuate. So this is when something called language justice enters the field, that there's a lot of indigenous farm workers who are not getting the information about COVID. They're not getting the information about the fires. And if we're expecting these people to help feed us, we need to do better by them as well. So that's a little bit about farm workers. And probably more of you are familiar with the fact that the current administration had decided, with the help of the meat industry, to determine that slaughterhouse workers were deemed not only essential workers, that were going to be required to go into the slaughterhouses and work no matter what, that they would not be allowed to say no, like other workers might be able to, that the government would say, based on some previous piece of regulation that was passed, that they would have to work. And my understanding, although we're still trying to clarify it, is that the farm workers also wouldn't be able to sue if the slaughterhouse workers, would not be able to sue if they caught COVID-19. And what we saw around the country was slaughterhouse workers having tremendously high rates of COVID-19. I wrote a blog called Vegans Need to Show Some Compassion to Slaughterhouse Workers Who May Have COVID-19. And the hate that we received was frightening to me. As somebody who went vegan for the animals, for compassion and for justice, it was disgusting to me that as something as horrific as COVID-19, where not only are you unable to breathe and how you feel, that if when you're sick, or even if you die, you cannot be with your family members can't be with you. Something so horrific to where you're sick in a hospital and your family members can't even be there to hold your hand. And vegans were outraged that we would ask for sympathy for slaughterhouse workers is outrageous. Mind you, vegans are often quick to remind us that slaughterhouses have 100% turnover rate. And that's spot on, right? It is true. Should that be telling us, though, that slaughterhouse workers don't want to be there? They're suffering there. They don't want to be in these positions. They don't want to be doing that. They're going to look for something else. And we need to have more compassion for anybody who's also a victim of an abusive system. And again, I'll remind you, I've been vegan since 1988 for the animals. Not saying I'm in favor of slaughterhouses. In fact, we don't work on any slaughterhouse worker issues. We work on farm worker justice issues in terms of who picks our food. but it doesn't mean we can't have that type of compassion for other human beings. These are some of the comments that we receive, right? When we talk about anything about compassion for humans, right? So when we talk about racism, when we talk about systemic racism, we're met with comments such as this. And, you know, we've decided we don't really share the racist posts anymore because I find it's abusive. It's abusive for anybody who's watching my presentations, who's watching this online, who's Black or brown, or to see these type of racist, hateful comments from vegans, because we want to show another side of veganism, a side of veganism where we support liberation and rights for all, that we want all of these systems that have been in place, non-humans and human animals, that all they do is seek to break and oppress and exploit and harm. We want them all to go away. And, you know, what I just want to say is that it's important that vegans learn to widen our own circle of compassion. And this has maybe helped some white vegans recognize this, especially with the movement, the Black Lives Matter, with the murder of George Floyd and many others who were killed at the hands of police. But we need to do more and we need to do better. But I want to take us to look at our food choices abroad, right? Let's not just look at what happens in the United States. So chocolate is another area that we look at when we're talking about food justice issues. And chocolate, just a reminder to everybody, is a luxury. It is not a necessity, although it may feel that way to some of us sometimes. What happens is that, and there's two main areas where slavery and child labor are taking place in the chocolate industry. One is Brazil, and the other one is Western Africa. And in Western Africa, you have children such as this who are, let's say this little boy will fill this bag up with cacao pods, right? That's what they use to make chocolate. It's going to be 40 pounds. And if he's struggling to carry this bag too much and he can't move fast enough, he'll be beaten. Because the chocolate industry sees them as expendable. So I got involved in this issue because I was watching a documentary that was talking to a former slave, a former enslaved person who escaped the chocolate industry. And they asked him, what would you say to a Westerner who still eats chocolate? And he said, tell them when they're eating chocolate, they're eating my flesh. And I realized as a vegan, at that time, probably over 20 years, I could never look at chocolate in the same way again. This is a photo that was taken in 2013. You can see the scars on the arms and legs of these young girls. And this is from a Rainforest Alliance certified farm. And these are the children we're talking about, right? Now, so how do they get there? How are these kids getting in these areas? And one is that they are kidnapped. They are sometimes trafficked hundreds of miles away from their family, where even their local dialect isn't being spoken. They are sold into it, maybe by a family member, or sometimes they think they're going into it and they're going to be getting paid and they're going to be able to send the money back home. In 2017, we had some children who were liberated enslaved people. See, I'm learning, always adjusting my language. Enslaved people who were liberated, who were like age 7 to 16. This is going on right now. As we're talking, this is happening now. This isn't like maybe, perhaps. This is taking place now, all for chocolate. So this is a quote from a farm worker in Brazil. He says, if I didn't have this rope around my neck, my 12-year-old son who works in the harvest would be studying. And to me, this is really important to share, primarily because many times people say things like, well, the kids are working with their parents, so therefore it's okay because it's what the family does. And what this shows is that's not inherently true. They may be doing this because with their family, but it's not the parent's choice. The parent would rather their child be in school. They would rather their child be able to have an education and have a future, but they're forced into it because simply they're not being paid enough. So what Food Empowerment Project has done is we've created a list of chocolates we do and do not recommend. And as a vegan organization, every chocolate has to make at least one vegan chocolate to make our list. Now, we don't go by certifications because the certifications have proven to be problematic. So our list goes through and it tells you some of the chocolate companies we feel comfortable recommending, some we do not feel comfortable recommending. And we also have a free app that you can download, and it's free on the iPhone and it's free on the Android. And again, we update this list every month. So every month we have new companies being added or possibly taken away. And so if there's a company that makes vegan chocolate that you don't see on our list, you're welcome to email us and we'll contact the company. And then eventually we'll post on our list. We give them over a month and a half to get back to us. And on our apps, if you've downloaded the app for free, the app has the ability for you to reach out to the company on Facebook. If you tweet, you have to add their Twitter handle, but we encourage you to use that as a way to reach out to the companies that you like that we recommend and asking them to, letting them know like, hey, great, glad you're caring about where your chocolate comes from. This is why I'm buying your product. Or, hey, why didn't you respond to Food Empowerment Project about where your chocolate comes from? Or, gosh, I'm sorry to see the Food Empowerment Project doesn't recommend you. It's really important, right? Most of us know our food choices can make a difference. Companies need to hear from us. They need to hear from you. They need to hear that it matters and you very much care about what's happening in Western Africa and that you do not agree that anybody should be enslaved for chocolate, adults or children. So one of the things that came out and started happening during a lot of the, and they're still going on, right? Let's remember that there are protests still going on around the country right now about Black Lives Matter, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor. A lot of the people have been murdered by police, Black people have been murdered by police. So what started happening and we started seeing, right, were corporations coming out. Oops. I don't know that I'm going to be able to go back. Okay. We started to see corporations coming out and saying Black Lives Matter, right? And absolutely, that's important, right? It's very, very important that corporations, organizations, individuals stand in solidarity with Black people and say, we see you, we see this, it's wrong, and we want to help fight it. We don't want to be complicit in what's taking place. But the problem is with some of these corporations like Ben & Jerry's, might I add, which is owned by Unilever, which tests on animals. But if vegans are still buying Ben & Jerry's, regardless of the fact that the company tests on animals, it's important to remember that this company has the ability to do a lot better than just say Black Lives Matter. Some of the systemic racism and discrimination that goes on is happening actually in the places where their products are being made and where their products are being sold. So what I would want to know from a company like Ben & Jerry's is, which we know, we don't recommend their chocolate, right? It's probably coming from Western Africa where slavery and child labor is absolutely prevalent. Do their Black Lives matter to Ben & Jerry's? Do all of their employees, are all of their employees being paid living wages? Or are they promoting and supporting every living wage campaign? Are they speaking out against racist policies that exist in Vermont or to exist on a federal level? I mean, that's the call I would be asking for when a company comes out and says Black Lives Matter. It's needs to be much more than saying Black Lives Matter. And I understand the corporation may have been doing things internally about it, but what has to happen is it has to be consistent. It needs to be across the supply chain, and there needs to be recognition that paying people their value matters. So when we talk about racism, systemic racism and discrimination that it takes place, it's important to recognize all the different ways that this comes up in, sorry, I'm trying to make sure I'm keeping track of time. It takes place, that it's happening everywhere, right? And so many times we don't realize the ways in which systemic racism exists, right? So let's take the Bay Area, let's take California, right? This is a photo where these the mom and daughter are walking in the street because they don't have sidewalks. It's in an incorporated area of Modesto. And you can trace the incorporation of Modesto to the fact that all the whiter areas of Modesto have been incorporated, and all the communities that are all the areas near Modesto that are Latinx are not incorporated. And there's amazing visual that I could show, but it would take a lot of time to prove this. But what I want to show you here is how these things happen, right? So this daughter, she will probably go to school and she might be treated differently, right? Because she's going to have muddy shoes. She's going to come in wet. She may be sweating when she comes into school. Something like this, right? Something as simple as not having a sidewalk has vast ramifications. The fact that these communities that are unincorporated, they have almost no services, so they don't necessarily have water, right? You can see literal pipes going around the unincorporated areas of Modesto to the incorporated areas. They also don't necessarily have fire services or trash service in these areas. Some of these things, or many of us have lived and experienced, maybe not these exact examples, but similar examples. And that's why many of us don't see, we can't say, I'm going to be vegan and I'm going to fight for non-human animals because I see the injustices that take place. Many of us have lived this, so many of our families have seen it, to where we can't just say, I'm going to support food justice issues for non-human animals and that's it. We look at our lived experiences, and honestly, that's how Food Empowerment Project was created. Our 4 program areas: veganism, farm workers, lack of access to healthy foods, and chocolate, because of my lived experiences. That I could not look at food justice issues anymore and just say, I got to fight for non-human animals, right? Only. My decision was to say, I want to fight for non-human animals and I'm going to fight for human animals. And I'm going to fight to make change for both of them and make the world a better place, make it a more just place. So when we're talking about these issues, especially the issues that I'm going to start going into now, it's really important for everybody who's listening to start understanding that you may not have seen these things in your own, where you live, where you come from, your own lived experience, but it is the reality for many people, including many in the Bay Area, which again is a very affluent community as a whole. So one of the things that COVID did is it kind of showed us all what it would be like to live in a community that didn't have access to healthy foods. Our pantries were bare, our grocery stores were bare. I don't know how many of you experienced it, but I had trouble finding tofu. I had trouble finding whole beans. I had trouble finding rice, right? Everybody probably had trouble finding toilet paper, but we're talking about food here. We had trouble finding food. And I think that if people can hold on to that memory, when I'm talking about the issues that I'm going to go to right now, imagine that's how where you live day to day was like. And if you've ever been to a grocery outlet, think about grocery outlet. Every time you go to grocery outlet, they have different things, right? There's no way you can really plan a meal based on what you find at grocery outlet, because it may be there for 2 weeks and then the rest of the month, it may never be back again. So just try to frame that as I talk about these issues. So the communities that I'm talking about, many people call them food deserts. Food Empowerment Project calls them food apartheid, because these are communities where you have higher rates of dietary diseases and more fast food areas, as well as convenience stores and liquor stores. These are areas where majority Black, Brown, and Indigenous people are living. This is an issue that is a national issue. In fact, it's a global issue. And I've spoken in communities around the globe. It is the same people who are impacted by it, primarily being the Indigenous or even immigrant communities. And here, our work has primarily been done in the Black and Brown communities at this point. So the reason why we started looking at this issue is because I lived in San Jose, Santa Clara County, I'm sure everybody knows, used to be called the Valley of Heart's Delight, and it's where Cesar Chavez organizing started. And again, I'm sure we all know Cesar Chavez was a co-founder of the United Farm Workers with Dolores Huerta, he was a vegan, but he got his start here organizing because there were so many orchards and packing. And so he was able to start his organizing here. I lived and I worked in downtown San Jose, where I had 2 liquor stores across the street from each other, where I worked and where I lived. And I decided to see, in this incredibly wealthy area, how big is this of an issue here? And of course, I kind of knew what I'd find. I do not know why my other slide didn't come up. But basically, what I found was that, there was 14 times more access to frozen vegetables in the more affluent communities than there were in the lower income communities. We surveyed every establishment comparing high-income zip codes to low-income zip codes in Santa Clara County to come up with our results. We then did focus groups in the community because we find that too many times people go into communities well-intentioned, but they start telling the community what to do instead of asking the community what they want, what their barriers were. And we paid each participant $50 for their time, and we fed them a vegan meal. $50 because of what they had to share was valuable. It was knowledge. Their lived experiences was important and deserved to be compensated. We were then asked years later to take a look at what was happening in Vallejo, California. Now, Food Empowerment Project follows environmental justice principles, so it means we don't go into somebody else's community who's an impacted person and start doing work there. We wait for people from the impacted community start talking to us and wanting to work with us. So one of the founding members of the Black Panther Party, David Hilliard, asked me if we would take a look at the lack of access to healthy foods in Vallejo. And what we found was, very similar to our work in Santa Clara County. Sorry. I wanted to add too that we always give our reports to the organizations working on the ground to help their funding. But again, what we found was the biggest barriers for people accessing healthy foods was yet again cost, which is why Food Empowerment Projects turned our attention to start working on living wage campaigns. We're on the steering committee of North Bay Jobs with Justice because living wages are absolutely critical. When you have communities who cannot afford the healthy foods, right? We're not even necessarily talking about if the proximity to the food is there or not. We're talking about food apartheid. We're talking about deliberate situations where Black and brown people are not being able to access healthy foods like other people, more affluent people in the communities. So we are fighting for living wages now, and every vegan who wants more people to go vegan, we encourage you to start advocating for living wages for every worker, farm workers, fast food workers, grocery store workers, restaurant workers, city, state, every level that we can, because we don't want food prices to go down, right? Farm workers are already not being paid well enough, but we want to create equity. We need to have equity in order for everybody to be able to access this food. And if we want people to stop eating non-human animals, the best thing we can do is make sure they can afford this food. And I'm not necessarily talking about, vegan ice cream, right? I'm talking about produce. I'm talking about fruits and vegetables that are too expensive because the majority of where people are accessing this food are in the convenience stores. And this isn't going to be cheap because they're not going to have a lot of it. So just to put it in perspective here, you can see right here what we're talking about. We're talking about the fact that the vast majority of places where people in Vallejo were going to be getting their food was convenience stores and liquor stores, not the grocery stores, right? That's just not where they were getting their food from. And a majority of these liquor stores were available in the Black and brown. So Vallejo, if you don't know enough about the community, is predominantly Black, Latinx, and Filipinx. So in those communities, and I'll say the seniors, the older people who are also living in these areas are heavily impacted. But again, as a vegan organization, Food Empowerment Project, as always, also surveyed, again, in Vallejo, we served every establishment. We surveyed gas stations, convenience stores, liquor stores, grocery stores. We only didn't survey the restaurants and the fast food places that had food. So now we surveyed all these establishments, right? And we also surveyed, as always, for meat and dairy alternatives. Now we did this one because we're a vegan organization. We don't want people consuming non-human animals if they can avoid it. So what we did is we surveyed also on the meat and dairy alternatives. One, because we think everybody has a right to eat their ethics. Everybody has a right to be able to eat meat and dairy alternatives if they don't want to contribute to the suffering of non-human animals. We also know that diets higher in fruits and vegetables is better for your health. But we also know, for us, right, there's two reasons why we're concerned about dairy. One is because we don't think that it's fair for the mama calf and her baby to be separated. In fact, that's one of the reasons why I went vegetarian when I was in elementary school. I didn't want to be responsible for separating families. The moms and the baby should be together, and who deserves that milk but her baby calf? But also we're concerned that many people, Black, brown, and indigenous people, are what many call lactose intolerant, which we call lactose normal. Let me focus on the first part. The first part is the fact that what's available in our communities is actually the cow milk, right? Which is bad for us, which we do not digest the lactose, right? So what it's doing, in fact, is it's making us sick. It's making our kids sick, which then when they go to school, they're sick, which harms their education. So what happens is that food that is better for us, like plant-based milk, is not being provided to us. Instead, what's being provided to us is something that makes us sick. So again, focusing on food apartheid. For Food Empowerment Project, we use the word lactose normal. And the reason why we use this, one, is because it's not normal for anybody to be consuming milk of another species. And two, to remind people that colonization is what brought cow's milk to many of our lands. So I'm Chicana, I'm a Hispanics. My ancestors in the Americas, whose land we're all on right now, it wasn't until the fourth voyage that Columbus brought the cow over, right? So if he didn't bring the cows over until his fourth voyage, my ancestors were not consuming milk. That's why it's not normal for us to. It's actually normal for us not to. So we call those of us who some might call lactose intolerant, lactose normal, because to call us lactose intolerant puts the onus on Black and brown people and indigenous people as if there's something wrong with us, and there's nothing wrong with us for not being able to consume not only the milk of a non-human animal, but also milk that colonizers brought to our land. So one of the other things we found in our work, and again, when we talk about food apartheid, is the fact that there was a grocery store called Safeway, which we're all familiar with, that was literally blocking the community's access to healthy foods. So there's a Safeway in the downtown area, which was primarily Black and brown people living, as well as older people living in that area. They moved from that location. They moved several miles away. And when they left, they put what's called a restrictive deed on their former property, preventing a grocery store from moving in. That was in place for 15 years, preventing any grocery store from moving in. This is still a problem around the United States. I'm running out of time. So I'll just say we have a petition on our website that we're asking you, please sign and share this petition. It's outrageous that a corporation was allowed to do this and continues to be allowed to do this. We do have a campaign against Safeway, and we would really love people in the Bay Area to get involved because they are based in the Bay Area, and we need to flex our muscles and tell them they have no business harming the health of our communities, and that we demand that they do better. So after we did the surveying, we went back and we did focus groups in Vallejo. We did 7 focus groups in Vallejo, including with people experiencing homelessness, seniors, as well as some that were Black, some that were Filipinics, and one that was done in Spanish. We again did the focus groups where we pay $50 for their time, fed them free vegan food. We put out our report, similar findings, and I'm speeding along here. One of the things I want to mention is a lot of immigrants who were living in these areas talked about how they ate healthier in their home countries than they did in the United States because they were used to growing their own food. Some of the solutions we see, obviously people growing their own food, not being a part of a system that was never meant for them to survive, us being able to feed ourselves, feed each other. Also, worker-owned cooperatives such as Mandela, who we've been working with several years now to bring something like Mandela Cooperative to Vallejo. Again, we serve free vegan food, had 3 community meetings to talk about worker-owned cooperatives. We just got done, as some of you know, with our Vallejo Healthy Food Fest, where we have free vegan food throughout the event for people to try, and different events, speakers, performers, all celebrating the diverse and vibrant community of Vallejo. Since we couldn't do it in this year in person, we are sending free vegan cookbooks to participants from Vallejo so that they can start trying some of the food on their own, since we couldn't feed them free vegan food. But we hope to be able to do it in person again next year. Some of you, of course, know Erica, who's on your board, I believe, who is our Vallejo community organizer. All of the events are online. Really encourage you to check them out. They were loads of fun. Our website is available fully in English and in Spanish. And just to say, we also have vegan Mexican food, which is in English and in Spanish. We also have the booklets available in English and Spanish for everybody. And we also have vegan Filipino food, which is in English and in Tagalog on our website. And announcing it here, we also have vegan Filipino food in booklet form at the last SFVS Fest. We were talking about this, and here it is. It's ready to go. We have it in English and in Tagalog. And we are currently working on vegan Lao food. One of our board members is Lao. So we are working on a vegan Lao food website. So that is me rambling through towards the end. What I wanted to just mention really fast is how a lot of these things are obstacles. We have the pandemic, the fires, but they're also opportunities for us to look at an unjust system that has taken place in food, figure out ways how we can dismantle it, and also showed us some of the ugly realities of our world. And hopefully we can join together to start creating a more beautiful and just world. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Lauren. I love every time I hear you speak, I learn something new. And it's you always just really bring so much information to the plate, and I really, really appreciate it. And something that has definitely been a running theme for this year's Veg Fest is sowing the seeds of compassion and meeting people where they're at. And I think you're really doing that, particularly with the Vallejo Healthy Food Festival. You're showing how awesome veganism can be, and giving people the opportunity to come at it at their own speed, at their own pace. And it's just amazing. All of the work that you do is, I want to be you when I grow up.
Thank you.
We did have a few questions in the chat. First of all, Pat asked, why are there so many liquor stores in poor areas?
Because they know they can get away with being there. Some communities have tried to block liquor stores, just like they try to block the bail bonds places, but they know they can get away there because when liquor stores are coming up to be in a community, they have to put a notice out, and the wealthier communities can mobilize, start putting stuff out saying, we don't want this liquor store in our community, where a lot of the working communities, they don't have time to be looking at that stuff. Some of them, which I didn't mention about how many people in these communities are what, and I didn't coin this term, but are called cash poor and time poor. They're working several jobs in order to make ends meet. And the likelihood that they're going to catch a register in the paper announcing this or see something put up and be able to do something is going to be difficult.
That's so true. And you do not see that in wealthier areas. You don't see people working 2-3 jobs at a time, which is also why so many folks in those situations have to get their groceries from the convenience store or from the liquor store, because they can't drive out to the areas where the grocery stores are.
Yep.
It's like an endless cycle that just keeps repeating itself. It's so distressing.
And I think they count on that. I mean, recently, I don't mean to step over any questions, but recently we helped change a regulation that had been on the books in California for decades. And that regulation was preventing the children of farm workers to be able to finish the school year. They were living, those small percentage who live in the labor camps in California, they would, once the picking season was over, the family was required to move 50 miles away. Well, some of the picking seasons ended in November. So the kids couldn't finish the school year. They didn't start until May. So the kids couldn't start school until May, which just created this, like you're saying, this cycle of poverty to exist, where they were basically creating more farm workers so that they would have workers. And luckily this regulation doesn't exist anymore as of 2018, maybe. I think we got it changed or something like that. And so now the kids can at least finish out the school year.
That is a huge step in the right direction. That's amazing. Wow. just yet another thing that Food Empowerment Project is really taking charge on. And I strongly, strongly, strongly encourage, thank you, Lorena, who's been posting a lot of the links as we've been talking. I appreciate that. Thank you. If I encourage everybody to go to foodempowermentproject.org, because there you can really get in-depth information on all of the different projects that they're working on, and definitely go to the donation page. Like, give money to Food Empowerment Project.
Thank you.
They're my favorite nonprofit, period. I mean,
thank you for having me, and thanks for your support, because it definitely makes a difference, especially to our hearts. So thank you.